Whispering Pines, Dakota Territory, April 1887. Margaret Sullivan stood on the porch of her ranch house, watching a rider approach through the heat shimmer, and her hand moved instinctively to the rifle leaning against the doorframe, because no one came out here unless they wanted something she could not give. The man sat his horse like he had been born to it, moving with the animal instead of against it, and even from a distance she could see he was not white. Her chest tightened. She had been Margaret Sullivan for 3 years now, ever since the real Margaret died of fever on the trail west, and left behind nothing but a deed to this land, and a name that did not belong to her. The rider came closer, dust rising behind him, and she could see traditional Shoshone clothing under a worn leather vest. He pulled up 20 feet from the porch and dismounted in one smooth motion.
My name is Tobias Sullivan. I have come to speak with Margaret Sullivan about purchasing this land.
His voice was low and steady, each word carefully chosen. Margaret felt the blood drain from her face. Sullivan, the real Margaret, had mentioned a cousin once, someone back east who might have claimed to the property. But she had been delirious with fever, and Margaret had not thought about it again until this moment.
I am Margaret Sullivan. This land is not for sale.
She kept her voice firm even as her mind raced. He studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes taking in every detail of her face.
The Margaret Sullivan I knew had a brother who died at Gettysburg. She wrote to me about it. What was his name?
A test. Of course it was a test. Margaret had no idea what the real Margaret's brother had been called, or if she even had one.
I do not discuss my family with strangers who show up uninvited. State your business, or leave.
My business is this land. I represent a group of Shoshone families who wish to purchase it for grazing rights. We can offer fair price.
And I told you, it is not for sale. I have a cattle drive coming through in 6 weeks, and I need every acre.
This much at least was true. She had contracted with a trail boss to bring 300 head through on their way north, and the payment would keep her going another year. Tobias tied his horse to the porch rail and stepped closer, and she raised the rifle slightly. He stopped.
You are not Margaret Sullivan.
The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Margaret's finger moved to the trigger guard.
Get off my land.
The real Margaret Sullivan had a scar on her left hand from a kitchen accident when she was 12. She wrote about it in a letter. Show me your hands.
Margaret did not move. Her hands were unmarked, work-worn, but smooth. Tobias took another step, and she aimed the rifle at his chest.
I said, leave.
If you shoot me, my people will come asking questions. If you let me speak, perhaps we can help each other.
She wanted to pull the trigger, wanted to end this before it began, but his eyes were steady, and somehow she believed he would not betray her without cause. She lowered the rifle an inch.
Talk fast.
There is a man in town named Percival Caldwell. He claims to be a preacher, but he is not. He runs a smuggling operation through the rail line, using the church as a front. He has been buying up land along the track to control access.
What does this have to do with me?
Your land sits at a key junction. If he cannot buy it, he will find another way to take it. He has already sent men to survey your boundaries. I saw them yesterday.
Margaret's jaw tightened. She had noticed tracks near the southern fence line, but had assumed it was drifters.
Why do you care?
Because my people camp on the southern edge of your property, with your permission. If Caldwell takes this land, he will drive us off. And because he killed a Shoshone man last year, who refused to carry his goods. The sheriff did nothing.
She studied his face, looking for deception, but found only carefully controlled anger.
What do you want from me?
Let me stay here. Work for you. When Caldwell's men come, they will see I am here, and they will hesitate. They do not want trouble with the Shoshone if they can avoid it.
And when they find out I am not really Margaret Sullivan,
Then, we will deal with that when it comes. For now, you need help, and I need this land protected. We can use each other.
It was a bad idea. She knew it was a bad idea. But she also knew he was right about Caldwell. She had heard rumors in town about the preacher who always seemed to have money and connections despite his small congregation.
you work for room and board. You sleep in the barn. You do not come into the house without permission. And if you betray me, I will shoot you.
Agreed.
He held out his hand, and after a moment she shook it, his grip firm and dry. She had just made a deal with the one man who could destroy her, and she had no idea if it was the smartest or stupidest thing she had ever done. 3 days passed in hard work and careful distance. Tobias proved himself useful, mending fences and training the green horse she had been avoiding. He spoke little and watched constantly, his eyes scanning the horizon like he expected trouble at any moment. Margaret kept the rifle close and tried not to think about what would happen when the real question started. On the 4th morning, she found him standing by the creek that marked the southern boundary, staring at something in his hand. She approached quietly, boots crunching on the dry grass.
What is it?
He turned and held up a silver locket, the chain broken.
I found it caught in the brush by the water.
Margaret's blood went cold. She knew that locket. The real Margaret had been wearing it when she died, and in a moment of weakness, Margaret had kept it, thinking it was the only piece of the dead woman she would carry. She had lost it 6 months ago during a storm, and had torn the ranch apart, looking for it.
Let me see.
She reached for it, but he pulled back slightly, his eyes sharp.
There is a photograph inside.
He opened the locket with careful fingers, and Margaret saw the tiny image she had seen only once before. A young woman with dark hair and a serious expression. The real Margaret Sullivan, and beside her, a man in Union uniform with a face that looked nothing like the picture Margaret had invented of the dead brother. Tobias looked from the photograph to Margaret's face.
This is Margaret Sullivan. And you are not her.
Her name was Margaret Sullivan. She died of fever 3 years ago on the wagon trail west. I buried her myself and said words over her grave. She had no family left except a cousin she barely knew, and this land deed was all she had. I took her name because I had nothing and nowhere else to go.
The words came out flat and exhausted. She had carried this secret for so long that saying it aloud felt like bleeding. Tobias closed the locket and looked at her with an expression she could not read.
What is your real name?
Sarah. Sarah Mitchell.
Why did you not go back east?
Because there was nothing back east but a man who thought he owned me, and a father who agreed. I ran and I kept running until Margaret died and gave me a way to stop.
She waited for him to condemn her, to threaten her, to demand something in return for his silence. Instead, he held out the locket.
You should keep this. She meant something to you, or you would not have buried her properly.
Sarah took the locket with shaking hands, the silver still warm from his palm.
Why are you not angry?
Because I understand what it is to have nowhere else to go, and because Caldwell is still the real problem. If he finds out you are not Margaret Sullivan, he will use it to take this land. We need to move carefully.
Relief flooded through her so sudden and strong that her knees nearly buckled.
What do we do?
We protect this land, and we protect your secret, and we find out what Caldwell is really planning.
Sarah nodded, slipping the locket into her pocket. For the first time in 3 years, she did not feel entirely alone. 2 weeks passed in tense watchfulness. Sarah and Tobias worked the land together, their movements falling into an easy rhythm despite the weight of her secret between them. He taught her to read tracks, and she taught him her system for managing the water rights. They spoke little, but the silence was comfortable, and sometimes she caught him watching her with an expression that made her chest tight. Then one evening a rider came from town, a young man Sarah recognized as the son of the general store owner. He was breathless and wide-eyed. The boy explained that Percival Caldwell had called a town meeting for the next night. Something about a charitable foundation to improve the rail line and bring prosperity to everyone. Attendance was mandatory, he said, and Caldwell had specifically mentioned that Margaret Sullivan was expected. Sarah thanked him and sent him on his way, then turned to find Tobias standing in the barn doorway.
It is a trap.
I know.
He is going to make a public offer for your land. If you refuse in front of the town, he will find a way to make you look unreasonable or suspicious. If you agree, you lose everything.
Then, I will not go.
If you do not go, he will come here, and he will not come alone.
Sarah paced the length of the porch, her mind racing through options that all ended badly.
What does he really want? Land is just land.
Control. The rail line runs smuggled goods twice a month. Whiskey, weapons, sometimes people who do not want to be found. Caldwell takes a cut of everything. Your land gives him a clear path to move goods off the train without going through town.
How do you know all this?
Because I have been watching him for 8 months. Since he killed my friend.
The words were quiet, but underneath them, Sarah heard a carefully banked rage.
Why have you not told the sheriff?
The sheriff is on Caldwell's payroll. Half the town is, one way or another. He gives loans and forgives debts, and makes himself necessary. By the time people realize what he is, they are already trapped.
Sarah stopped pacing and faced him.
We need leverage. Something that makes him more afraid of us than we are of him.
The locket.
What about it?
Caldwell knew the real Margaret Sullivan. I heard him mention her once in town, talking about how sad it was that she died before she could make something of her land. But the photograph in that locket shows her alive, and well. If we can prove the photograph was taken after the date she supposedly died, we can threaten to expose that he knew she was still alive and did nothing. It will not hold up to real scrutiny, but it might buy us time.
Sarah pulled the locket from her pocket and opened it, studying the tiny photograph in the fading light.
It is not enough. He will just deny knowing her.
Then, we need to find something else. Something he cannot deny.
That night, Sarah lay awake in her narrow bed, listening to the wind rattle the shutters and thinking about choices that could not be unmade. She had survived 3 years on borrowed identity and borrowed luck. But luck always ran out eventually. Sometime past midnight, she heard the creak of the barn door and knew Tobias was awake too, probably checking the horses or staring at the same dark ceiling from a different angle. She rose and pulled a shawl over her nightdress, then walked barefoot across the cool dirt yard to the barn. He was sitting on a hay bale with a knife and a piece of wood. carving something she could not see in the dim light of a single lantern.
Cannot sleep.
Too many thoughts.
He did not look up, but he shifted slightly, making space on the bale beside him. She sat, careful to keep a few inches between them.
Tell me about your friend. The one Caldwell killed.
His name was Running Deer. We grew up together. He was a better tracker than I will ever be, and he could make anyone laugh. Caldwell hired him to guide a shipment through the backcountry, but Running Deer realized what he was carrying and refused to continue. Caldwell shot him and left him in a ravine. They said it was an accident, that Running Deer fell from his horse. No one questioned it.
Sarah heard the grief beneath the careful control and wanted to reach for his hand, but did not know if she had the right.
I am sorry.
I am tired of being sorry. I want to stop him.
Then, we will.
He finally looked at her, his dark eyes searching her face in the lantern light.
You are not afraid.
I am terrified. But I have been afraid before, and it did not kill me.
You are braver than you know, Sarah Mitchell.
It was the first time he had used her real name, and hearing it in his voice made something in her chest crack open. She reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. He did not pull away.
We will figure this out. Together.
Together.
They sat in the barn until the first gray light of dawn touched the horizon, not speaking, just holding on. The next day they rode into Whispering Pines together, Sarah in her best dress, and Tobias at her side in clean clothes that still carried the unmistakable mark of Shoshone tradition. Eyes followed them down the main street, some curious and some hostile. The meeting was set for 7 in the evening at the church, which Sarah found bitterly appropriate. They had 4 hours to find something that would give them an edge. Tobias led her to a small boarding house on the edge of town, where an elderly woman named Mrs. Chen ran a laundry service. The woman's eyes lit up when she saw Tobias. They spoke in low voices while Sarah waited, and then Mrs. Chen disappeared into the back room and returned with a ledger.
She keeps records of everything she washes. Caldwell sends his laundry here twice a week. She noticed blood on a shirt collar 6 months ago, right after Running Deer died. She kept the shirt.
Sarah's pulse quickened.
Can we see it?
Mrs. Chen nodded and brought out a carefully wrapped bundle. The shirt was expensive fabric, custom tailored, and the collar was stained with old brown blood.
This proves nothing by itself.
But it is a thread. If we pull hard enough, something might unravel.
They thanked Mrs. Chen and left, Sarah's mind working through possibilities. They had 2 hours left before the meeting.
We need to search his office.
The church.
His real office. He is a businessman. He has to keep records somewhere.
The bank building. He has a room on the 2nd floor.
Can we get in?
If we are willing to break a window.
Sarah smiled despite her fear.
I have broken worse things.
They climbed the back stairs of the bank building while the street below emptied for supper. Tobias jimmied the lock on Caldwell's office door with a bent nail, and they slipped inside, closing the door softly behind them. The room was neat and organized, everything in its place, which somehow made it more sinister. Sarah went to the desk while Tobias checked a filing cabinet. She found correspondence, loan documents, church finances that looked entirely legitimate. Then her fingers touched a false bottom in the center drawer.
Tobias.
He came to her side, and together they lifted out a thin wooden panel. Underneath were letters, dozens of them, all in different hands. Sarah picked up one at random and read. It was a confession, written by a man in town admitting to theft from his employer. Another letter confessed to adultery. A third admitted to falsifying a land claim.
Blackmail. He collects their secrets.
And uses them to keep control.
Sarah kept searching and found a small black book filled with dates, amounts, and initials. The entries went back 3 years.
This is it. This is his smuggling ledger.
Can we take it?
If we take it, he will know someone was here. He will move everything, and we will lose our chance.
Then we copy what we can. Fast.
They worked in frantic silence, Sarah copying names and dates onto a paper she had brought while Tobias kept watch at the door. She had filled half a page when they heard footsteps on the stairs. Tobias grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the window. They climbed out onto the narrow ledge just as the door opened. Sarah pressed herself flat against the building, her heart hammering so hard she thought it would break her ribs. Through the window she could see Caldwell enter, his face calm and pleasant as always. He went to the desk, checked something in a drawer, then left again. They waited 5 full minutes before climbing back inside.
We have to go.
Not yet. Look at this.
He was holding a telegram, dated 2 days ago. It read, "Shipment arrives Thursday night. Usual drop. Buyer confirmed. Payment on delivery." Thursday night was tomorrow.
This is our chance. If we can intercept the shipment and get proof of what he is moving, we can take it to the territorial marshal.
Or we can both end up dead like running deer.
Do you have a better idea?
Tobias looked at her for a long moment, then folded the telegram and put it in his pocket.
We go to the meeting. We act normal. Then tomorrow night, we stop the train.
The church was packed when they arrived, every bench filled and people standing along the walls. Percival Caldwell stood at the pulpit looking like the answer to everyone's prayers, his expensive suit perfectly tailored and his smile warm and generous. He welcomed them all and spoke about community and progress and the bright future that awaited Whispering Pines if they worked together. Then his eyes found Sarah. The sheriff explained that Mr. Caldwell had a proposal that would benefit them all, and Caldwell stepped forward with a rolled document.
Miss Sullivan. Margaret, if I may. I know you have struggled to maintain your ranch since you lost your dear husband. I wish to offer you a fair price for your land, enough to set you up comfortably anywhere you choose. And in return, I will donate a portion of that land to the church for a new school. Everyone benefits.
The crowd murmured approval. Sarah felt the trap closing around her. If she refused, she looked selfish. If she agreed, she lost everything.
My husband has been dead for 3 years, Mr. Caldwell. I've managed just fine on my own.
Of course you have. But a woman alone on that much land, it is dangerous. Anything could happen. Why not accept help when it is offered?
The words were gentle, but the threat underneath was clear. Sarah stood, and Tobias rose with her.
I appreciate your concern, but my answer is no. The land is not for sale.
Caldwell's smile did not waver, but something cold flickered in his eyes. The preacher said he understood and respected her wishes, though he hoped she would reconsider before something unfortunate occurred. The meeting ended, and people filed out, some nodding to Sarah with approval and others avoiding her eyes. She and Tobias walked back to their horses in silence.
He will come for you now.
Let him come.
Sarah.
Tomorrow night we stop the train. Tonight we prepare.
They rode back to the ranch under a sky full of stars, the air cooling rapidly as it always did in the high desert. Sarah felt the weight of what they were about to do settling on her shoulders, but beneath the fear was something else: determination. And maybe, if she was honest, a strange wild hope. Thursday dawned clear and hot. Sarah and Tobias spent the day preparing, checking weapons, and planning the route to the drop point Caldwell's telegram had mentioned. It was a siding 3 miles north of town where maintenance crews sometimes stored equipment. The train would slow there to offload cargo before continuing to the main station. They would have a narrow window to act. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Tobias saddled both horses, and Sarah changed into her riding clothes, practical split skirt and boots. She checked her rifle twice and tucked a small pistol into her belt. When she came out of the house, Tobias was standing by his horse, and for the first time since they met, he looked uncertain.
If this goes wrong,
It will not.
if it does, I want you to know that I do not regret coming here. Meeting you.
Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks.
We are not dying tonight, Tobias. So you can tell me the rest of that thought after we finish this.
He smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes, and nodded. They mounted and rode north as the light turned gold and then amber. The siding came into view just as dusk settled over the land, a small platform and a water tower beside the empty track. They dismounted and tied the horses in a stand of cottonwoods, then moved closer on foot.
There.
He pointed to wagon tracks in the dust, fresh enough that they had not been blown away by the afternoon wind. Someone had been here recently, probably to set up for the pickup. They found a hiding spot behind a stack of old rail ties and settled in to wait. Full dark came on fast, the stars appearing in great sweeping arcs overhead. Sarah's hands were steady on her rifle, but her heart was racing. Then she heard it. The low rumble of the approaching train, growing louder.
Get ready.
The train came around the bend, slowing as it reached the siding. It stopped with a hiss of steam and the squeal of brakes. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a door on one of the freight cars slid open, and 2 men jumped down. They moved quickly, unloading crates and stacking them on the platform. Sarah counted 6 crates total, each one marked with shipping labels she could not read from this distance. The men finished and climbed back on the train, and it pulled away into the night. Sarah and Tobias waited, barely breathing. 5 minutes passed. Then they heard horses. 3 riders appeared from the south, and even in the darkness, Sarah recognized Caldwell's tall frame. He dismounted and went to the crates, prying one open with a crowbar. Moonlight glinted off glass bottles. Whiskey, just as Tobias had said. But then Caldwell reached deeper into the crate and pulled out something wrapped in oilcloth. He unwrapped it, and Sarah saw the dull gleam of rifle barrels. Weapons. Lots of them.
This is enough. We have seen what we needed.
We need proof.
Sarah moved before he could stop her, rising from cover and stepping into the open. She raised her rifle.
Step away from the crates, Mr. Caldwell.
Caldwell froze, then turned slowly. His 2 men reached for their guns, but he held up a hand to stop them. The preacher's voice was calm and almost amused. Caldwell said it was quite a surprise to see her out here, and asked if she was lost.
I know what you are doing. smuggling weapons and whiskey through the rail line, using your position to blackmail half the town into silence. I have proof.
Caldwell's smile widened, and he said she was a clever woman, but not as clever as she thought. He asked what name was on the land deed she was so desperate to protect.
Margaret Sullivan.
He said that was interesting, because Margaret Sullivan had been dead for 3 years, and he had the death certificate to prove it. He had known from the moment she arrived in Whispering Pines that she was an imposter. He had been waiting to see what she would do, whether she would be useful or a problem. She had chosen problem.
Put down your weapon.
Tobias had moved to Sarah's left, his rifle aimed at Caldwell. His voice was steady and cold.
You will put the weapons back and leave this town.
Caldwell laughed and said the guide had changed his loyalty quickly and asked if he knew what he was protecting. He told Tobias that the woman beside him was a fraud who had stolen a dead woman's identity and land. She was a thief and a liar. Tobias did not lower his rifle.
I know who she is, and I know who you are. A smuggler and a blackmailer who hides behind a preacher's collar.
Caldwell's expression hardened. He nodded to his men, and they drew their guns. Sarah fired first, aiming high to scatter them. The shot echoed across the desert, and Caldwell's men dove for cover behind the crates. Tobias pulled Sarah back behind the railroad ties as return fire cracked through the air.
Stay down.
He returned fire, and one of Caldwell's men yelped and dropped his gun. The other man kept shooting, but his aim was wild. Caldwell had not drawn a weapon. He stood calmly behind the crates and called out that they were making a mistake. He said the town needed what he provided, that the railway contract would collapse without his influence, that the cattle buyers would stop coming. He controlled the flow of goods and information. Without him, Whispering Pines would wither and die.
The town will survive without you.
Sarah stood and fired again, this time aiming for the crate nearest Caldwell. The bullet punched through the wood and shattered a bottle inside. Whiskey poured onto the platform. Caldwell's expression finally cracked, and he shouted for his men to protect the cargo. The remaining man broke cover to drag the crate away, and Tobias shot the ground in front of him. The man stumbled back. Caldwell pulled a small revolver from his coat and aimed it at Sarah. Tobias moved without thinking, stepping in front of her as Caldwell fired. The bullet grazed Tobias's shoulder, and he staggered, but did not fall. Sarah caught him and pulled him back behind cover.
You are hit.
It is nothing. Keep shooting.
She tore a strip from her sleeve and pressed it against the wound. Blood seeped through, but the bullet had only cut the surface. She tied the cloth tight, and he nodded his thanks. Caldwell was shouting now, his composure gone. He said they had ruined everything, that the next shipment was worth thousands, that powerful men in Cheyenne were expecting delivery. He said he would see them both hanged for this.
You will hang first.
Sarah stood again, and this time she aimed carefully at the largest crate. She fired 3 times in quick succession, splintering the wood and rupturing more bottles. The whiskey spread across the platform and dripped between the boards. Caldwell screamed and lunged toward the crates. Tobias fired a warning shot that stopped him. The 2 smugglers had fled into the darkness, leaving Caldwell alone. He stood on the platform, revolver hanging at his side, staring at the ruined cargo.
Drop the gun.
Caldwell looked at her, and for a moment she thought he would shoot anyway. Then he dropped the revolver and raised his hands.
Walk toward us. Slowly.
Caldwell descended from the platform and walked across the open ground. When he was close enough, Tobias stepped forward and took the revolver from the dirt. Sarah kept her rifle trained on Caldwell's chest. The false preacher's face was pale with fury. He said they had no idea what they had done, that the men he worked for would come for them, that running him out of town would only delay the inevitable.
Then, we will deal with them too.
Tobias told him to start walking toward town. They would take him to the sheriff and let the law handle the rest. Caldwell said the sheriff was in his pocket, that half the town owed him money or favors, that no one would believe a dead woman and a guide.
They will believe the evidence. We have the crates, the weapons, the whiskey. We have witnesses who saw you here tonight.
Caldwell laughed bitterly and said witnesses could be bought or silenced. He said his partners would erase every trace of this operation and make sure Sarah and Tobias disappeared along with it.
You are wrong.
Sarah reached into her pocket and pulled out the locket. She opened it and held it up so Caldwell could see the photograph inside. His face went white.
This is Margaret Sullivan. The real Margaret. She gave this to me before she died and told me everything. How you blackmailed her father into selling his land for nothing. How you had her followed and threatened. How she fled east to escape you and died of fever on the way. She wanted someone to stop you. I promised her I would.
Caldwell stared at the locket, and his hands began to shake. He said it was impossible, that no one knew about Margaret's father, that he had covered every trace.
You missed one. And now, everyone will know.
She closed the locket and put it back in her pocket. Caldwell seemed to deflate, his shoulders sagging. He said they had won, that he would confess, that he would give them the names of his partners in exchange for leniency.
You will confess to the sheriff, not to us.
They marched Caldwell back toward town, keeping their rifles ready. The walk took over an hour, and the sky was beginning to lighten by the time they reached the edge of Whispering Pines. A few early risers were stirring, and they stared in shock as Sarah and Tobias led the preacher down the main street. The sheriff came out of his office, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He looked at Caldwell, and then at Sarah and Tobias. Sarah told him to get his handcuffs. The sheriff hesitated, and Caldwell said the sheriff should arrest these two for assault and destruction of property. The sheriff looked uncertain.
We have evidence of smuggling and blackmail. The cargo is at the rail platform. You can see it for yourself.
The sheriff frowned and asked what kind of smuggling.
Weapons and whiskey. He has been using the rail line to move illegal goods and using his position as preacher to control the town. He blackmailed Margaret Sullivan's father and caused her death. I have proof.
She pulled out the locket again and showed it to the sheriff. She explained who Margaret was and what Caldwell had done. The sheriff listened, his expression growing darker. He looked at Caldwell and asked if it was true. Caldwell said nothing. The sheriff sighed and pulled out his handcuffs. He locked them around Caldwell's wrists and said he would ride out to the platform to see the evidence himself. If it was as they said, Caldwell would be held for trial. Caldwell said the sheriff was making a mistake, that powerful men would come for him. The sheriff told him to be quiet and led him into the jail. Sarah and Tobias stood on the boardwalk as the sheriff disappeared inside. The town was waking up fully now, and people were gathering in clusters. whispering and pointing. Sarah felt the weight of their stares. She had been Margaret Sullivan for months, hiding behind a dead woman's name. And now, the truth was coming out. Tobias touched her arm gently.
You did the right thing.
I stole her identity. I lied to everyone.
You honored her wish. You stopped the man who destroyed her family. That is more than most people would do.
She looked at him and saw no judgment in his eyes, only steady support. She asked what would happen now. He said the sheriff would investigate, and Caldwell would face trial. The smuggling operation would be dismantled. As for her, that would depend on the law and the town.
They could arrest me for fraud.
They could. Or they could see that you did more good than harm. You ran a ranch honestly. You helped people. You exposed a criminal.
I do not know if that will be enough.
The sheriff came back out and said he was riding to the platform with 2 deputies. He told Sarah and Tobias to stay in town and be ready to give statements. He said he would decide what to do about Sarah's situation after he confirmed the evidence. He mounted his horse and rode off with the deputies. Sarah watched them go and felt her stomach tighten. Tobias said they should get some rest. They had been awake all night. She agreed, and they walked toward the edge of town where her wagon was still tied. The ranch was an hour away, and she was too tired to make the trip yet. Tobias said they could wait at the boarding house. She nodded, and they walked in silence. When they reached the boarding house, the owner came out and stared at them. The old woman asked if it was true that Preacher Caldwell was a smuggler. Sarah said it was true. The woman shook her head and muttered that she had never trusted him, that a man who smiled that much was hiding something. She let them inside and showed them to separate rooms. Sarah collapsed onto the bed without removing her boots. She closed her eyes and tried to quiet her racing thoughts. She had done what she came to do. She had stopped Caldwell. But now, she faced the consequences of her deception. She might lose the ranch. She might be arrested. She might be forced to leave Whispering Pines. She thought of Margaret's face in the photograph, young and hopeful. She had promised to finish what Margaret could not. She had kept that promise. Whatever happened next, she could live with that. She drifted into an uneasy sleep and woke to the sound of voices outside. The sun was high, and she guessed it was near noon. She stood and washed her face in the basin, then went downstairs. Tobias was already there, sitting at a table near the window. His shoulder was freshly bandaged, and he looked rested. He stood when he saw her.
The sheriff is back. He wants to see us.
They walked to the jail together. A crowd had gathered outside, and people stepped aside to let them through. The sheriff was in his office, sitting behind his desk with a stack of papers in front of him. He gestured for them to sit. He said he had seen the cargo at the platform, and it was exactly as they described. Weapons, whiskey, and forged documents. He had also found records in Caldwell's rooms that detailed his smuggling operation and the names of his partners. It was enough to convict him and several others. The sheriff looked at Sarah and said now they needed to talk about her.
I understand.
The sheriff said he had sent a telegram to the county seat asking about Margaret Sullivan. The response confirmed that she had died 3 years ago in Missouri. He asked Sarah who she really was. She took a breath and told him her real name was Sarah Brennan, that she had been a nurse in St. Louis, that she had cared for Margaret in her final days. Margaret had told her about Whispering Pines and the ranch and Caldwell's crimes. She had given Sarah the locket and the deed and asked her to finish what she could not. Sarah had come west and taken Margaret's identity because she knew no one would listen to a stranger.
I did not do it for money. I did it to keep a promise.
The sheriff leaned back in his chair and was quiet for a long time. Then he said she had committed fraud and impersonation, which were crimes. But she had also exposed a smuggling ring and saved the town from a corrupt man. He said he would have to report the truth to the county, but he would recommend leniency given the circumstances. He said the ranch legally belonged to Margaret Sullivan's estate, which meant it would go to her next of kin, if any existed. If not, it would be sold at auction. Sarah nodded. She had expected this.
I will leave as soon as you require it.
The sheriff said she could stay until the county made a decision, which would take a few weeks. In the meantime, she was free to continue running the ranch. She thanked him and stood. Tobias stood as well. They left the jail and walked back toward the boarding house. The crowd had dispersed, and the street was quiet. Sarah felt numb. She had known the ranch was never truly hers, but losing it still hurt. Tobias walked beside her in silence. When they reached the boarding house, he stopped and turned to face her.
What will you do?
I do not know. Go back east, I suppose. Find work as a nurse again.
You could stay.
The ranch will be sold. I have no claim to it.
You could buy it.
She laughed bitterly and said she had no money. The little she had saved was barely enough to survive.
I have money. From guiding work. It is not much, but it might be enough for a down payment. We could bid together.
She stared at him.
Why would you do that?
Because you belong here. Because you have worked that land and made it productive. Because you kept your promise.
You do not owe me anything.
I know.
He stepped closer.
I want to help because I care what happens to you. I have cared since the first day. I tried to stay neutral, to do my job, and nothing more. But I cannot. You have my loyalty. You have more than that.
Sarah's throat tightened.
You barely know me.
I know enough. I know you are brave, and stubborn, and honest. I know you keep your promises, even when it costs you. I know I want to be part of whatever comes next.
She felt tears sting her eyes and blinked them away.
If we buy the ranch together, you would be tied to me, to my lies, to whatever trouble I bring.
I am already tied to you. I chose that last night when I stood beside you at the platform.
She reached out and took his hand.
I do not deserve this.
Yes, you do.
They stood together on the boardwalk, and Sarah felt something shift inside her. She had come to Whispering Pines carrying someone else's name and someone else's grief. But now, she was herself again. And she was not alone.
If we do this, we do it as partners. Equal shares. Equal say.
Agreed.
And if the county refuses to sell to us, or if we cannot raise enough money, we accept it and move on.
Agreed.
She squeezed his hand.
Thank you.
He smiled, and it was the first real smile she had seen from him. They went inside and spent the afternoon making plans. Tobias calculated how much they could raise between his savings and the small amount Sarah had. It was not enough for a full purchase, but it might be enough to secure a loan from the bank. They would need a co-signer and Tobias said he would ask his uncle, who had standing in the community. Sarah said she would write to the county and explain her situation, offering to buy the ranch at a fair price. It was a long shot, but it was a chance. Over the next 2 weeks, they worked together to prepare. Tobias rode to the reservation and spoke with his uncle, who agreed to co-sign a loan. Sarah went to the bank and met with the manager, who was skeptical but willing to consider the request if the county approved the sale. The sheriff sent regular updates. Caldwell had been transferred to Cheyenne to await trial. His partners had been arrested. The smuggling operation had been dismantled. The town was slowly returning to normal. Then, on a hot afternoon in late April, a letter arrived from the county. Sarah opened it with shaking hands. The county had reviewed her request and the sheriff's recommendation. They had determined that given the unusual circumstances and her service to the community, they would allow her to purchase the ranch at market value. The deed would be transferred to her and Tobias jointly, provided they secured financing within 30 days. Sarah read the letter twice to make sure she understood. Then, she ran to find Tobias. He was at the livery, checking on his horse. She waved the letter, and he came to meet her.
They approved it. We can buy the ranch.
He took the letter and read it, his expression carefully neutral. Then, he looked up and smiled.
We need to go to the bank.
They went immediately and met with the manager again. With the county's approval and Tobias's uncle's co-signature, the bank agreed to the loan. The paperwork took hours, but by the end of the day, they had secured the financing. The ranch was theirs. They walked out of the bank and stood on the boardwalk, blinking in the late afternoon sun. Sarah felt lightheaded.
We did it.
We did.
I cannot believe it.
Believe it.
She laughed and grabbed his hand.
We need to celebrate.
How?
I do not know. Dinner? A drink?
Both.
They went to the saloon and ordered a meal. The other patrons stared, but no one said anything. Word had spread about Caldwell's arrest and Sarah's role in it. Some people were grateful. Others were suspicious. Sarah did not care. She had her land, and she had Tobias. That was enough. They ate and talked about the ranch, about what they would plant and build, about how they would manage the work. Tobias said he would continue guiding occasionally, but spend most of his time on the ranch. Sarah said she would hire help for the busy seasons. They talked until the saloon closed, and then walked back to the boarding house. At the door, Tobias stopped.
There is one more thing we need to discuss.
What?
Us.
Sarah's heart quickened.
What about us?
We are partners now. In business. But I want more than that.
She stepped closer.
So do I.
Then we should make it official. Not just the ranch. Us.
Are you asking me to marry you?
Yes.
She smiled.
That was not very romantic.
I am not a romantic man.
I do not need romance. I need honesty. And I need you.
Then say yes.
Yes.
He kissed her, gentle and careful, and she kissed him back. When they pulled apart, she was breathless.
When?
Soon. After the cattle drive. After we settle the ranch.
How soon?
A month. Maybe 2.
That is acceptable.
She laughed and kissed him again. They went inside and said goodnight at the top of the stairs. Sarah went to her room and lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling. She thought about Margaret and the promise she had kept. She thought about Caldwell, who would spend years in prison. She thought about the ranch and the life she would build there with Tobias. She thought about the wedding, simple and soon, just as she wanted. She fell asleep smiling. The next morning, they rode out to the ranch together. The cattle drive was due in 2 days and there was work to be done. They spent the day repairing fences and clearing the grazing fields. By evening, they were exhausted, but satisfied. They stood together on the porch and watched the sun set over the hills.
This is ours, now.
Ours.
It feels strange.
Good strange.
Yes.
She leaned against him, and he put his arm around her.
When the drive comes through, we will need to negotiate the price.
I will handle it.
No. We will handle it. Together.
Together.
The sky turned gold and then deep orange. The air cooled and the first stars appeared. Sarah thought about the long road that had brought her here, the lies and the risks and the fear. She thought about the moment she had decided to take Margaret's name and come west. It had been the hardest decision of her life. But it had also been the right one. She had kept her promise. She had found a home. She had found love.
I want to go to the river.
Now?
Yes. I want to see it in the evening light.
They walked down the path to the riverbank, the same place they had stood weeks ago, when he had first told her about Caldwell. The water was low and slow, reflecting the last of the sunset. They stood at the edge and watched the current.
What are you thinking?
I am thinking about Margaret. About what she would say if she could see this.
She would be proud.
I hope so.
I know so.
Sarah reached into her pocket and pulled out the locket. She opened it and looked at Margaret's face one last time. Then, she closed it and tucked it back into her pocket.
I will keep this. To remember.
Good.
They stood in silence, watching the river and the darkening sky. Behind them, the ranch house glowed with lamplight. Ahead of them, the future stretched open and unknown.
When should we have the wedding?
June. After the cattle are sold and the first planting is done.
June is good.
Where?
Here. At the ranch. By the river.
No church?
No church. Just us and a few witnesses.
My uncle will want to attend.
Of course. And the sheriff. And maybe the boarding house owner.
That is enough.
More than enough.
She turned to face him.
I love you.
I love you.
They kissed as the last light faded and the stars came out. The river murmured beside them, and the night settled soft and warm. They walked back to the house hand in hand, and Sarah felt a peace she had not known in years. She had come to Whispering Pines alone and afraid, hiding behind a dead woman's name. But she was leaving that behind now. She was Sarah Brennan again, and she was home. Over the following days, they worked from dawn until dark preparing for the cattle drive. The herd arrived on schedule, 300 head driven by a crew of drovers from Wyoming. Sarah and Tobias met them at the northern boundary and negotiated the price. The lead drover was a grizzled man named Hastings, who tried to lowball them. But Sarah held firm, and Tobias backed her up. They settled on a fair price, and the cattle were moved into the grazing fields. The drovers stayed one night, camped by the river, and left the next morning. Sarah and Tobias watched them go, then turned their attention to the cattle. The animals were in good condition and would bring a solid profit at market in the fall. For now, they needed water, grazing, and supervision. Tobias hired 2 temporary hands from town, and they set up a rotation to watch the herd. Sarah focused on the ranch house, making repairs and improvements. She fixed the leaking roof, patched the broken window, and whitewashed the walls. Tobias built a new corral and reinforced the barn. By mid-May, the ranch was running smoothly. The cattle grazed peacefully. The fields were green, and the house felt like a home. Sarah and Tobias fell into a rhythm, working together during the day and sitting on the porch together in the evenings. They talked about the wedding, making simple plans. Tobias's uncle agreed to officiate, as he was respected in both the settler and Shoshone communities. They would hold the ceremony by the river in early June. Sarah bought fabric in town and sewed a simple dress, cream-colored, with lace at the collar. Tobias cleaned his best clothes and bought a new hat. The invitations were sent, and the day was set. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and warm. Sarah woke early and dressed carefully, pinning her hair up and adding a small spray of wildflowers. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. She had changed so much since coming to Whispering Pines. She was stronger, braver, more certain of who she was. She heard footsteps outside and went to the window. Tobias was walking toward the river with his uncle and the sheriff. A few other guests had arrived, townspeople who had come to support them. Sarah took a deep breath and walked outside. The ceremony was simple and short. Tobias's uncle spoke in both English and Shoshone, blessing their union and asking the land to be kind to them. Sarah and Tobias exchanged vows, promising to stand by each other, to work together, and to build a life of honesty and love. They exchanged rings, plain silver bands that Tobias had bought from the trading post. When the uncle pronounced them married, Tobias kissed her, and the small crowd cheered. They walked back to the house together, hand in hand, and the guests followed. Sarah had prepared a simple meal, and they ate together on the porch, laughing and talking as the afternoon stretched long and golden. By evening, the guests had left, and Sarah and Tobias were alone. They stood on the porch, watching the sun set over the hills, the sky turning deep orange and purple. The cattle were settled for the night. The ranch was quiet, and the air smelled of grass and dust and home. Tobias put his arm around Sarah's shoulders and pulled her close.
We did it. We made it through.
We did.
She leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his body, the steady rhythm of his breathing. She thought about everything that had brought them to this moment. The lies she had told, the fear she had carried, the danger they had faced together. And now, standing here as his wife, she felt a peace she had never known before.
No more running. No more hiding.
No more pretending.
He kissed the top of her head, and they stood together in silence as the last light faded from the sky. The stars began to appear, one by one, bright and clear in the Dakota night. Sarah closed her eyes and breathed in the moment, knowing that this was the beginning of something real and lasting. She had come to Whispering Pines as a fraud, desperate and afraid. She was leaving that woman behind. She was Sarah Sullivan now, married to a good man, standing on land that was truly hers. The future stretched ahead, uncertain but full of promise. They would work the ranch together, raise cattle, build a life. There would be hard days and good days, storms and sunshine, struggle and joy. But they would face it all together, side by side, honest and free. Tobias turned her toward him and kissed her again, slow and gentle.
Let us go inside.
Yes. Let us go home.
They walked into the house together, closing the door behind them, leaving the night and the past outside where they belonged.